Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and of course, as always, with me is Ken. How are you, Ken?
Exceptionally grateful to be here, Rory. You've joined us at episode 154 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. 3 topics we're going to be discussing today, starting with something really, of the moment, and that is placement interviews. If you're on a course where you need to do placement hours and you haven't yet gone into placement, then you're kind of going to be looking around at this moment. So very topical. And then we're going to check in with CPCAB. And Rory, you met up with Kelly Budd to speak about something that I think is vitally important, not just for students, but for qualified counsellors. And that's a term called deliberate practice.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And CPCAB have coined this phrase, really, or they've certainly transmitted this phrase, about how we make sure that we're working to optimum levels with clients. What do we need to do to make sure that we are the best we can be?
Yeah, I guess it's you have CPD, but then you have deliberate practice, which focuses down even more. And then we're going to check in with our last section, which is our practice matter section, where we take something that may appear in a therapy room, something we might come across, and we're going to be looking at Stockholm Syndrome today. Interesting topic with an interesting story. You don't want to miss that. But let's start off with thinking about those placement interviews. And just before we even get into this topic, there's a super duper handout on this, and we'll give you a little bit more information on that. So whether you're in placement or about to go into placement, or placement is somewhere in the future, you're going to want this handout, because they can bring up a lot of, anxiety, Rory, when you've got this interview you need to go to.
Yes, when I think about the most nerve-wracking parts of my training, it was the interviews. It was the interviews for the course and the interview for a placement. And I'll share a little story with you. I'm sure I may have shared this anecdote before. When I went for my interview, I'd spent a number of years being a commercial manager. So I was used to being interviewed by customers and people we partnered in the business with. And I'd done my research on the organisation and on the placement organisation, which was Mind. And I did all my research, and I thought I've got all the answers to all the questions. Well, how wrong I was. Ooh. I went in and I sat down. Yes. Oh, indeed, Ken. And I thought, here we go. I'm really on top of this. And the first question was, "Oh, hello, Rory. You got a cup of tea? Yeah, got a cup of tea. Good. Yeah. Got here. Okay. Yeah, fine." So we got some questions, and I said, "Right, okay." And he said, the first question is, "Have you got any hobbies?" And I was like, what hobbies? And I said, yes. Well, what kind of hobbies have you got? And I said, well, I'm a photographer. I like taking pictures, I like doing street photography. And we must have had a good 5 or 6 minutes exploring that. And what the question was aimed at wasn't particularly about my skills or knowledge or any other issues about me being a counsellor. It was how I exercise self-care. And that really introduced me to the world of counselling, that it's a holistic practice. It's not just how you perform, it's also about how you take care of yourself. And of course, I found out later, and it was put in the ethical framework, it's an ethical imperative. So the questions you get asked can be quite left field questions. So I've compiled a list of possible questions you may get asked as individuals or a group. And it will give you some idea of the structure. I don't want to give too much away because I think colleagues who run practices don't want fully rehearsed people coming in to get a placement. But I do think that it might give you some ideas of what you may have to think about, because you may not have an answer for a couple of the questions. And I do think that knowing the kind of things they're asked gives you some idea of how to audit yourself and prepare yourself for what could be quite a different profession. It's a very different profession than a lot of people think who've been in other work coming to counselling. It's a very, very different mindset, very different profession.
I love how Carl Rogers refers to counselling not as a way of doing, but a way of being, who we are. It's kind of our essence. And I guess, Rory, just hearing your story, I'm not really that surprised. Having been around in counselling now for a good few years, and smart interviewing is to look to the person, not necessarily the skill set. And because when working in a placement situation, chances are you're going to be fitting into a team. And I guess when you're at interview, that's going to be one of the elements. Is this personality going to fit in with our team? It's not about just rattling off all the theories. I guess by the time you're sitting there in a placement interview, it would be expected that you have a fitness to practice letter and that you've been in a tuition situation and been reviewed fit to be, I guess, at that interview. So it is about looking at who you are and being open, I think, to whatever they ask. Take yourself in. Yourself is just good enough. And I know that you can become anxious about them. And I think that's when you feel that anxiousness coming, it's only because you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be nervous at all. So when you feel that anxiety coming up, just remind yourself, I'm feeling this emotion right now because I really care about this.
Yeah, and you talk about anxiety, and that anxiety has certainly been channeled in our Facebook page because people have been asking this question. We had quite a few questions in our Facebook page about what kind of things happen at a placement interview. And if you don't know about our Facebook page, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us. We're a closed group, but knock on the door. We're going to let you in, and you can join 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. I don't know how many thousand it is now.
Tens of thousands, Rory.
Tens of thousands. We'll say tens of thousands of people, like-minded, who are counsellors, some are supervisors, some are qualified colleagues, a lot of tutors in there. So why don't you pop in and you can post your questions, and we may very well speak about it on the podcast.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And if you're a member of our counselling study resources, which is kind of our paid for section, we do a lot of free stuff, including this podcast, articles on our website, our Facebook group, but we do have a paid for section as well for students to kind of support them during their studies. And if you are a member of that, just log in and I challenge you to go and do a search and just put in the word placement. The reason I say that is because there's a lot of information around placement, including kind of steps to getting a placement, including templates of letters that you can send out and some blueprints that you can follow, because it can also be quite tricky finding the right placement. And I remember last summer, Rory, you did a workshop. It's a placement workshop, which is also available in Counselling Study Resource on a Watch Again, I guess it is. And that was a really in-depth lecture where you covered a lot of different elements of placement. And if that interests you, end of this episode will give you details of how you can find out more about that. But back to that interview situation, I think, Rory, you did the right thing in looking up the website of who you were going to see. And I think that's a great tip. You may not be asked about it, but have a look. Is this the kind of place that I want to work? What is the client group that they work with? When were they founded? Who are the members? If you go to the About Us page, sometimes you can actually see little biographies of the people that work there. And chances are you may get into an interview situation and see somebody that you may have seen on the website, and it gives you something maybe to talk about, and it shows that you do have an interest in their organization. So definitely a top tip there, even if they don't ask you.
Yes, and also I think there's something about making sure the placement fits your philosophy. You need to be a round peg in a round hole when you find a placement. It needs to be you need to be kindred spirits, because you're not just working on your own. You're working with the team, and you're working with the philosophy of the organization. And if that philosophy doesn't fit for you, that will come up. So do your research, and please don't just get a placement because you need a placement. I'll just work there, it'll be fine. It sounds quite a logical thing to do because placements can sometimes be quite hard to get. But where you can, try and find one that fits your own philosophy, your own sensibilities, because that will channel through into client work. If you're working for an organisation that you don't believe in, ultimately it will affect every piece of work you do, and you're working with vulnerable people, and it will channel through eventually. So try and find an organisation that you can believe in and that you're proud to be part of. I think that's really important too.
100%. And it's important to get a placement, but it's much more important to get the right placement. Think about a placement as part of your study journey, and it's a really important part of your study journey because you're now client facing. You need to know that you are supported. You need to know that the policies and procedures that underpin the agency or the place where you're doing your placement are looking after you, looking after the clients, that you've got somebody to go to if you should run into difficulty, that somebody is assessing clients before they get to you, that they are looked at and made sure that they are within your competence to be able to work with them. And I recall going out and looking for my first placement, Rory, and I was so excited, and I was almost happy to snatch the hand off the very first placement that came my way. And a placement came my way, opportunity came my way, and I went for interview, and I left that interview and I had a horrible feeling within my stomach, and it was, I don't want to work here. I don't feel that this is the right place for me. And it was such a difficult decision because I didn't have any other placement offers at the time. It was such a difficult decision to say, you know what, I don't want to do this. But it was the right decision looking back. I ended up in a placement that was really supportive, and I learned so much from it. And I'm glad I made that decision, and I'm glad of the experience of having to make that decision, I guess. And there's often a thought that the placement is doing you a massive favor, but it is a balanced relationship when you're going into placement. You are bringing cutting edge knowledge from your course. Courses are changing all the time. The awarding bodies are amending the specifications and the schemes of work all the time. You're working with the most current research and that works, and you're bringing that into the organization where you go in as a placement. You're bringing all of that study, all of that enthusiasm. You have so much to give. And from the very first minute of your very first client interaction, you're in practice. And that practice is your practice. It's not the placement's practice. It's not anybody else's practice. For the entirety of your career, whether you work in private practice or you work in an agency, it doesn't matter. It's your practice. And you need to make the decisions that are right for your practice from the onset. And that is, I guess, when you're looking for that placement and going for that interview.
Oh, absolutely. Very wise words. And just so it was true when you were an apprentice, Ken, and it will be true for other apprentice therapists. And I use the term apprentice deliberately because that's what it is. It's an apprenticeship. You're learning a craft, and an apprenticeship is only good as the craftspeople around you and giving you tasks that fit your level of skill, which is why assessment is so important. If you're thinking, say, for instance, you're a furniture maker, you may be given a task of making a small item first before someone asks you to make a dining suite. And the same goes, I think, for counselling. A good placement will make sure you get clients that fit your level of experience, a level of skill. And then slowly, as you develop more, they will offer you clients with more difficult presentations. And that way you can learn, you can grow, and you feel confident, and you develop your craft. There is an old term, and it is a sexist term, but I'm going to voice it because I think it's accurate. Is that it's kind of, apprentice, journeyman, and this is the term that's used, but journey person or master craft. And you start off as an apprentice, you journey through, and then you become a master at your craft. And I've seen that cited in text, but I do acknowledge that it uses the term man, but it does fit for everybody.
There you have it. And I guess if you want to download Rory's super duper handout, and that contains some questions that you might consider that may or may not be asked by a placement when you go into interview, but it gives you something to consider, you can get that for free. You just go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. Right at the top of the website, there's a little tab in our menu bar that says podcasts. That's what you're listening to. Click on podcasts. You're going to see all of our podcast back catalogue, and just make your way to episode 154, which is today's episode. And right there on that page, you can download Rory's super duper handout. Moving away from placement, Rory, and I guess looking at practice, but not just any old practice. We're talking deliberate practice, and this came from your discussion with Kelly from CPCAB.
Absolutely. We caught up with the fab Kelly Bud, and when and myself visited CPCAB, one of the terms that we heard was deliberate practice, and it fascinated me. So I did a little bit more research, asked a few questions, and basically, as Kelly will outline, deliberate practice is the idea of making your practice more efficient, deliberately going out to make sure that you're developing, learning the skills, being reflective and reflexive, so that you can develop your craft, if you like. We talked about apprenticeships and journey people and mastercraft, and that is exactly that journey, developing yourself into a competent therapist. And Kelly outlines some interesting research and some ways of attaining that.
Let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we're here back with Kelly Bud from CPCAB, and we're going to be talking about quite an interesting phenomena, deliberate practice. Heard it spoke a lot about when I visited, Ken and myself visited you in the spring. What is deliberate practice?
Morning, Rory. It's a very, very interesting, I was going to say kind of new concept. It's new-ish. In terms of therapeutic practice, it's something that I think people are talking about a lot at the moment, and are only going to be talking about more and more. Essentially, it's a way of improving your counselling practice at the very, very kind of most simplistic level. It's a range of different methods and techniques that people can use to get better at what they do. I think one of the things that kind of comes up and how deliberate practice kind of came about in terms of therapeutic work is an acknowledgement that therapists are effective. We know that now. One of the things that people have started to really kind of realize in the recent years is that across the theoretical approaches, we're pretty much kind of on an even keel in terms of our kind of effectiveness of practice. But interestingly, we're not getting any more effective. When they look at client outcomes and the, I guess, kind of improvement rate of clients for the last 50 years, they're not getting any better than they were. So we're not getting any better than we were as therapists. And considering that we put so much effort into training and research and continuous improvement, why aren't we getting any better?
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think you're referring to the work of John Norcross from Scranton University. And a huge amount of research that was done by the American Psychological Association about 10 years ago, and it proved the old adage, and regular listeners of the podcast will know about the dodo bird theory, and Saul Rosenwag, who talked about the fact that all the modalities are on, as you say, an equal footing. It's the quality of the therapeutic relationship that is the best indicator of the outcome of therapy. So is deliberate practice really thinking about how we integrate and how we work in the therapeutic relationship to strengthen and deepen it?
It is that, but it's looking really at the finer details of, for each individual practitioner, what is it that they need to improve upon? Because one thing that research is showing is that practitioners are, some of them are a lot better than others. And the ones that seem to be a lot better are the ones who engage in very, very deliberate practice on the things that they know they need to improve upon, or on the things that people give them feedback on that they need to improve upon. So your average therapist tends to get pretty good in training and then get into practice, and then they tend to kind of plateau. But those that engage in deliberate practice, they don't plateau so much. They continue to gradually improve, and their outcomes get better and better and better. So the researchers such as Wampold and Goodyear and Miller were looking at what makes some practitioners get better and others not necessarily. It doesn't mean that they're bad, it just means that they're not improving, and why. And so essentially deliberate practice, I guess in the simplest of terms, it's saying a way of, I guess, kind of putting yourself under a little bit of pressure in those areas that you're aware you're not so good at, so that you can improve, and you can look at what happens in the process when you put pressure on yourself.
So my question then is, how would a practitioner know the things they're not good at?
Well, that's one of the things that is very, very important in this process, is determining what your kind of baseline level of effectiveness is. So what are your strengths? What do you need to improve? So it's looking at things like your own awareness, looking at things like taking on board feedback from coaches, teachers, supervisors, particularly when you're in practice, tutors when you're in training, outcome measures, looking at feedback from clients. So what is it that they're telling you, which is quite a touchy subject. A lot of people don't like asking for feedback from clients. And also very much looking at reviewing and reflecting on your own practice. One of the things that the researchers, such as Wampold and Ruth Ranier, are looking at the moment is an emphasis on filming or recording yourself in practice and then looking back at it.
Yeah.
So that you can, and I think that that's something that often we've shied away from as practitioners. But in terms of kind of improving your practice, you really do need to be able to sit down and genuinely look at what your practice is like.
I think that's really interesting, because during training, of course, that happens a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I was videoed in practice and had a critique, and as were my peers. But that's never happened again since I graduated. And there's a lot of talk in the therapeutic world about reflexivity. It's okay being reflective and thinking, I may do this better, I may do that better. But being reflexive is, how are you going to put that into practice? How are you going to measure it? How are you going to know that what you believe to be true works? Makes us all little scientists, really.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing that it's strange. If you were a musician or if you were an athlete, you would understand that you need to, often with athletes, they identify what their personal best is. And then when they look to improve, they measure themselves against their personal best and they try and push beyond that each time. But if you're in training as a practitioner and your last kind of measurement of personal best was at the end of your training, and since then you haven't really looked at it in that way, how are you stretching? How are you improving yourself?
Yeah.
So deliberate practice is really about determining that baseline. What is your level of effectiveness? What do you need to improve upon? And get systematic and ongoing and formal feedback on that. And that can be from recording yourself or from looking very honestly at your work with your supervisor. And then deliberate practice is tailoring particular exercises on a micro level to address the things that you need to improve. So it might be a particular skill that you know that you get caught up on every time. Particularly when you're in training, it's often particular skills. When you're in practice, it might be that you keep coming back to the same client issue that triggers something for you. And deliberate practice doesn't say, okay, so just avoid that issue in future. It says, okay, so let's look at this issue. Let's tailor something that's deliberate and systemic around that so that you can really work through what that's about for you.
Yes, it really does speak, doesn't it, to supervision and how supervision's carried out. I've worked with a number of people through the years who were supervisors. Some saw it as a bit of a chat, others saw it as a bit of a performance management task. And I think it fits in between that. I think, in my supervision practice, I would ask supervisees to think about specific things and to come back and tell me how they've worked on that. And I think supervisors need to be, dare I say it, in the counselling world, have a coaching mindset. I think there's a coaching mindset within being a supervisor.
Yeah, and I think it's also working with your supervisor to say, okay, so we've identified this as an issue. What are we really going to focus on about that, and how are we going to look at it? One of the best kind of phrases I've heard to explain deliberate practice is causing yourself a manageable level of strain to stimulate growth and adaptation.
I think that's a great quote, isn't it?
I really like it. It's the idea of, if you're a weightlifter, you have to make sure that you're lifting a weight that isn't too easy for you.
Yes.
because it doesn't do anything, versus lifting a weight that's far too heavy for you. You need to find the right one to lift to really exercise the muscle that you need to improve. So that's what deliberate practice is. It's finding the right weights for the right muscles.
Yeah, and I guess that the supervisor would take the role of your personal trainer and understand you and your
Absolutely.
Yeah, and say, okay, we're going to lift that.
Yeah.
We're going to lift that weight today, not the weight you lifted yesterday.
Yeah. And then we'll go back to you and say, okay, so how was that? How did it feel to stretch that muscle? Are we going for a heavier weight in a month's time, or are we working on that again and again and again until that muscle builds up?
Yeah. I think that's a really good analogy, and you're absolutely right. In every other profession, there is a evaluation, and it's done in a way that can be measured. But our profession doesn't seem to have that built in as its core. Maybe that's because the history of counselling has been kind of, the non-directive element, the kind of non-judgmental element. But I think sometimes people confuse judgment with assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that, like you say, people sometimes shy away from this sort of focused work because it feels like it's different to the non-directive work we would do with clients. But actually, if you want to work in the best interest of your client in a really non-directive way, then maybe your deliberate practice can be about really enhancing your non-directivity, and you can look at tailoring some exercises around that.
Yeah. So it may be worth, if you're a supervisor listening to this or a practitioner, to think about setting some goals and maybe being really honest with yourself. I mean, I'll be honest, I was hopeless at reflecting and paraphrasing as a student. I just never got it. And my supervisor at the time helped me to develop that skill and not to get too hooked up on it as well. And now I think I can reflect and paraphrase. But I think the interesting thing is that it was something that had to be worked on. It was lifting that heavier weight.
Yeah. And it's different between saying, okay, so let's do a lot of skill sessions, and if your reflection, your paraphrasing comes up, then we'll look at it. Deliberate practice would be saying, okay, so let's look at one session or multiple sessions where you really, really focus on your reflections over and over and over and over again, and we'll look at how that works out. So it's really kind of making a deal of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So really interesting, certainly food for thought. The headline, of course, being that we don't seem as a profession to be getting any better through the years, and obviously that needs to change. So as always, Kelly, it's a real pleasure having you on, and thank you very much.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
I like, Ken. You know what I like? I like the fact that CPCAB puts so much stock in research.
Yep.
You know, that's one of the things that really came across when we paid a visit. That everything they do is research based, and they'll change the qualifications depending on what the newest research is, which is mightily kind of satisfying. If you're a student on a CPCAB course, you're getting the absolute latest practice ideas from experts in the field, and I think it just reinforces CPCAB as an awarding body that they would consider this idea of deliberate practice, and that the journey never stops. Even if you're qualified, the journey never stops.
Yeah, we don that hat of eternal scholar when we kind of sign up to become a counsellor, because you don't get the certificate at the end of your studies and that's that. It's just the very beginning of it. And kind of our next topic, I guess, is about sharpening our competence, understanding what we might come across in our practice. And it's an interesting name of a topic, and it's an interesting story and an interesting concept, and it is, of course, Stockholm Syndrome, Rory.
Yes, it's interesting, and we're going to go back to 1973, and someone called Jan Erik Olsen. He was a convict on parole, and he robbed a bank, and he held the people in the bank, the people who worked there, for 6 days hostage. And eventually the police, rightly so, decided that they were going to end the bank robbery, and they burst through the door with flashbangs and tear gas and all the kind of things you'd expect in a kind of ending of a bank robbery. But a strange phenomenon came from that. It was that the hostages, instead of being grateful, blamed the police, and they wouldn't give evidence against the captors, and they also went to raise money for their defence. And everybody was absolutely puzzled by this behaviour. They'd been held at gunpoint by some pretty nasty individuals, and it was a psychiatrist, a criminologist and psychiatrist called Nils Bergeaut, I think that's correct pronunciation, who coined the term Stockholm Syndrome. And we sometimes know it as trauma bonding, where people in a very traumatic situation will bond to their captors. And why is this an important piece of theory? Well, for those of us working with clients who are victims of domestic violence or abuse, there are a few basic things that we need to understand. And one of those is that it's very, very hard for someone, even in the most difficult of situations, the most violent of situations or psychologically damaging of situations, to leave their abuser. And I think the research says there's 21 times of serious abuse before somebody will actually leave. And it is due to the fact that our brain chemistry bonds with our abusers or people who have been abused. And what will happen is this interesting phenomena, certainly of the people in the bank, they were saying, oh, they're really nice, they let us go to the toilets. And he's like, well, that's not really nice, is it? That's a kind of basic, decent human thing to do. But they put a lot of stock in that, and they didn't hit us very much. And it was those kind of narratives that you can hear in the therapy room. How often have I heard that, and you can, working with a client who may be in a very violent relationship, and you pick them up, and the thing is, it's counterintuitive, because part of you's thinking, well, what are you saying? You're being abused, and you're thanking the person who's doing it for letting you go to the shops, but it is a psychological phenomenon, and one I think that we should all know as therapists. We should all know it, because I think it's very, very easy to, and I've heard this from professionals in other fields who say, well, they mustn't be that serious about leaving, because they'd go, wouldn't they? How often do we hear that? If it was that bad, they'd leave. And in fact, it's not true. It's a psychological condition where people bond to their abusers.
Yeah. And it's so important that we understand this. As therapists, we're kind of trained to be empathic, and there's the term of walk in their shoes, understand it from their perspective. And this one can be a tricky one because it's not understandable when you are external to the situation. And I'm going to use the example of abuse here. And somebody is being abused. It's very apparent what is going on and that is wrong, but from the perspective of the person who is being abused, as you say, they can defend, they can make excuses for the abuser, and I'm just going to use in this instance, the abuser in my example that I'm making up is a male, or he does get angry so much, but he's so nice otherwise, and defending the person. And we need to look for little signs. There's little cookie crumbs, I guess, that can kind of give us an indication of where somebody is maybe in an abusive relationship and where we're starting to see this Stockholm Syndrome shine through. And the person is usually held in some form of social isolation, where the abusive person is their primary source of information and contact. So if you take the example of the bank robbery, Rory, I think at the very beginning, when the guns came up and pointed at the people, At that point, they probably felt very little empathy for the people holding the guns, because it all of a sudden happens. But in the absence of anybody else being there to say, "Hey, that person is pointing a gun at you," you then the bonding starts, I guess, and you start. The severity of the situation fades away, and you're now starting to hook on to they let me go to the toilet. They didn't hit us that much. And so it's that social isolation, usually cutting off from family, from friends, from media very often, where the truth is the truth that comes from the abuser, the person that is keeping them in that situation. And if something is told to a person often enough, it's very easy to start buying in and believing it as a truth when there's nothing else to compare it to. There's nobody else to give their opinion and say, "Hey, that person's holding a gun at you."
Yeah, absolutely. And there is actually quite a lot in the literature about trauma bonding. And in fact, you can go back as far as 1940 to Ronald Fairbairn, who was a psychoanalytical therapist and who talked about object relations and the theory of attachment. And he saw much the same thing happening with children who had been badly abused by the parents, but had this bond with them. And it seems to be part of the human condition. And there's an end to this story, Ken. There's an end to the Stockholm Syndrome story, which I thought was very interesting. A few years ago, I was listening to Radio 4, which in the UK is a radio station that does kind of stories from science and current affairs, that type of thing. And they had an interview with one of the survivors from the bank robbery, and she was still adamant. And I'm talking, this happened in 1973, and I'm talking maybe a couple of years ago. So, and she was still adamant that the police were wrong to raid the bank and free the hostages. And the interviewer was really pressing, and she wouldn't have any of it. She wouldn't have any of it. She said they were wrong. They were very violent, the police. They threw tear gas in. They had guns. The interviewer actually said, the term Stockholm Syndrome, and she discounted that as well. She said, no, it's nothing like that. They were wrong. They weren't that bad. They were held hostage for 6 days at gunpoint.
Wow. Yeah, and what is interesting in this, Rory, is that it's not a recognised mental health condition. When you look it up, if you go and look in DSM-5, it's not mentioned. There's no mention of it, and that is really, really interesting. We need to understand it. We need to understand how we might see it present in our therapy rooms. We need to know what the clues are that we might look for, and that you've just described, Rory, that same scenario plays out again and again and again in abusive relationships, where even if the person has the courage, maybe calls in the police, afterwards there's almost kind of a regret for doing that, a remorse for calling in the police, almost exactly as you said, they didn't need to come in bashing on the door like that, they didn't need to put the cuffs on. It's really a very, very interesting phenomena, how it plays out.
Yeah, and I would say quite frustrating for colleagues in the police, because which is one of the reasons here in the UK that the police can now prosecute abusers without evidence from the victim. The law changed a few years ago, and they were having case after case after case of perpetrators going to court and the victim not giving any evidence. So I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, the law changed. It might have been a bit longer thinking about it. The law changed, and now you do not need the victim's evidence to make a prosecution, because Stockholm Syndrome is recognised. It's recognised that some people will not give evidence because of this, as we call it, trauma bonding. Well, what a great episode. We've come up quite a lot. We've talked about questions that come up in placement interviews for those people starting on their practice journey. And then for those of us who are a bit further down the road, we've talked about deliberate practice, making sure that our skills and that we're deliberately trying to be better and more competent in our work. And then finally, we talked about a well-known psychological phenomena that I think most therapists would see in their practice room from time to time, and that's Stockholm Syndrome. So as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and look after each other.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.